you're on mute.
Classic.
Yeah, I mean, I just automatically mute people because then if you've got a whole bunch of people coming into a call, you don't end up with total chaos. But invariably, it's like I have to go, you're on mute.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's like a rite of passage at the beginning of every Zoom call, isn't it?
How are you? How was your holiday? Oh, was it a holiday? It was a holiday. You went on a wine tour, didn't you?
I did go on a wine tour. Well, I went to Bordeaux Wine Festival,
Ah,
um,
nice.
which was, yeah, it was amazing. So super hot though. Um,
Really?
it's just like I don't know if you've been to Bordeaux, but there's a riverfront. Well, the river goes through the city, and so
Ah, right.
it was different stamps from all the whites in Bordeaux, and then it starts with like the deep reds and goes onto the white, so you can just make your way along, and then you just see people collapse on the grass, taking a little snooze because they're a bit wind up.
My God, that sounds amazing. That sounds like the perfect festival.
Yeah, it was nice. It was very chill. Yeah, a bit different from I don't know Glastonbury, which was on at the same time.
Yeah, God, I went to Glastonbury when I was 16. I don't want to age myself, but it was a really long time ago. And there weren't that many people there. It was a small festival back then, and I just couldn't go back now. I
Wow.
look at it now and I'm like, God, it just looks like carnage.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness. Wow. I think it'd be quite
yeah.
interesting to go back now and see how it's changed. No.
I don't know. I mean, I've been to like Burning Man. I went to Burning Man in 2009 and 2010, and that was
Yeah.
really great. But I probably wouldn't go back to that either because now it's like Paris Hilton goes and Katy Perry goes, and I'm just like, yeah, that's not really my scene.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's
it,
become quite image focused
well, I mean, I
series.
think it's inevitable, isn't it? If something's like that fun and that amazing, it's great. But a lot of the original burners don't go anymore just because the whole vibe has changed.
Absolutely.
And, the
Yeah.
whole gifting thing that you have, like people aren't really sort of following it in quite the same way. And they're just sort of turning up in their massive RVs with like, they're not roughing it. They're not like, hey, I'm here for the experience. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but it was cool. I mean, I taught yoga there. So I did my gifting was like teaching yoga. So I did yoga
Oh.
classes in like, I think it was called the Earth something. It was some environmental tent.
Hmm.
But it was great. Yeah, it was awesome. Well, thank you so
Wow.
much for doing the interview. I'm really looking forward to chatting to you. And I guess probably your projects have moved along a bit since last time we spoke. So I was going to say, do you want to just like introduce yourself, I guess? Say who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm Jenna, and I'm a documentary filmmaker. I've been in this industry fairly recent for the last 2 years. And before that, well, my background was in neuroscience. So I was working in biotech. And yeah, I just had I always had a curiosity in human behavior, and that led me into going to documentary filmmaking. And since I'm currently based in Barcelona, I was working with a documentary company here. And more recently, I've gone freelance and in my own time started making a Bitcoin project. And there's lots of dots to fill in along the way, but so don't know how much you want me to say at the beginning.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's so much to fill in. When we had the prior conversation, I was just like, God, this is such an interesting journey. Can you talk about what your interest is in, like the human behavior, like what sparked that? Because it's funny that you worked in sort of pharma essentially, but bioscience, as you said, but it doesn't seem like a logical progression to go to be a filmmaker. But then the way that you put context around that is saying that you're interested in humans, it actually makes a hell of a lot of sense. But can you talk a bit about your education in that space and your journey there?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I went to study neuroscience in the first place was because I don't know. I've always just been someone who asks a lot of questions. I remember being in a car when I was 8, and my mum and my dad was like, "You ask a lot of questions, don't you?" And but they said it in a way as if to say, "Just keep asking questions. Don't stop asking questions." And yeah, I think I just like as a personality do always I wouldn't say I'm cynical, but um I quite like a debate.
You're
And
skeptical.
maybe skeptical, but I don't know. I just like to have a foundation of facts before going into something. And yeah, human behavior just always interested me because it infiltrates everything. It's how we communicate with people. It's whether we make our own decisions in life, how it's basically it encompasses our whole experience. And you get to the point where you have to decide what you study at uni, and so, I don't know, I'm interested in this, so I went for neuroscience, and I really enjoyed it, but I found that during the course it was quite focused on so I went to Edinburgh, which was quite a strong research focused university, and your courses are decided by what the researchers in your university are studying at the time. And it was quite strongly focused on biomedical sciences, or physiology of the brain. And we had a few courses which were more concerned with like emotion, decision making, and those for me is what I found so interesting, because you can relate to it in your everyday life. And after finishing uni, I had this degree in science, and I was already interested in filmmaking, and I'd read this article in Nature, which the most well-known science publication, and it was about a scientist who'd gone into filmmaking and was working in the interchange between science and storytelling through video. And that was the first time throughout until that point where I'd actually felt really excited about a career. Until that point it was just doing various internships, and yes, all very exciting, but really you don't really feel it in yourself. It's just you're told to be enthusiastic, you're told to do this. So I didn't really feel it inside, so that I really want to do it. But I could just come out and have student debt, so I started working in kind of science communications and marketing.
And what is that? So that's like doing the write-ups of the various different things for publication.
So basically it's like you're working with like medtech companies or pharmaceutical companies, or like healthcare charities, and you're trying to there's different things that they do, but most of it is basically translating what happens on the science side to the general public, either to change like people's perception, or to make payers such as like the NHS or policymakers more open to a certain type of like treatment. And we were working for example, I was working on a campaign that was to do with ketamine nose spray, which is treatment for antidepressants. Yeah, that's why it's so and it was very interesting, because you're working with perceptions, like after the whole war on drugs, a lot of psychedelics and any work with what we like consider as recreational drugs became totally banned. Even work on psilocybin, magic mushroom, got totally written off, even though there was a lot of like positive there was good, they were making progress. And so we were working in what are the current like perceptions of about this thing amongst society, amongst policymakers, and how can we change that. And I was working in the UK, and then I also was seconded out to Dubai. I was working in like a behavioral change campaign around healthcare in the Middle East, because they at the time, I'm not sure, I haven't followed how it's changed now, but if you're a citizen of the UAE, you are entitled to private healthcare anywhere in the world, and for your family to go along. So it became like a holiday industry. Yeah, it became a holiday industry where if someone broken their leg, or maybe they needed like operation on their heart, then there were these entire resorts. A lot of them are in Thailand, nice tropical places like this, or some in the USA, and the whole family will go along. The brother will go water skiing, mum's going to go sunbathing, get nails done, someone has an operation. It's mad. Because, and
I had no idea. So why is that? Is that just because they're so oil rich that they decide that one of the things they're going to do for their citizens is just give them really kick-ass healthcare? Is that the logic behind it?
Yeah, pretty much. I guess they had a lowish population, like 90% of people in Dubai are expat, so it doesn't apply to them. And yeah, they could do it. They didn't have a particularly strong healthcare system themselves, so that was just the system. But then obviously they realized that it's not sustainable. and and they have a lot of health problems themselves, you know, like it was really I was surprised to find out a lot of people have vitamin D deficiency. And vitamin D is
That
obviously what you get from the sun. They live in the
yeah.
desert and
Yeah,
people
but the problem with that is particularly for women. It's the same in Iran. They have, I think it's high incidence of rickets because they're all covered up, so they're not getting enough sun exposure. Yeah, it's the
yeah,
irony of it.
no, isn't it crazy? And obviously they live, a lot of them living in, well, if they're fortunate enough, a lot of them live in you know, air conditioning and jump from building to building. Actually, the local citizens do, because in Dubai there's quite like a hierarchy between if you're Emirati, and then there's, you know, different like racial classes that are quite instilled still. I noticed when I was there. So
Yeah.
yeah, really interesting, and I loved working amongst stuff to do with how people's beliefs are formed, what makes people think things they do, what are their influences, and as I said, I had already had an interest in something creative like filmmaking, and I was just waiting for opportunity to develop some skills, like do some professional training in filmmaking, and then combine the two somehow. And that came along. I finally made the decision a year before, yeah, beginning of COVID, and then so I quit my job and I'd gone to Japan for the winter because I've always been quite big into adventure sports, and I've done a lot of random university jobs like ski instructing and these kind of things. So, you know, it was all set up. I got my place at this film course in Barcelona the next year. I was going to Japan, all good. And then I got to Japan a few months later, COVID starts, everything changes. And I actually got stuck in immigration in Thailand for like 60 hours or something ridiculous. During this process was a whole other story. And then I ended up
Was was
working.
this was this when you were trying to make your way back to the UK that you got stuck
Yeah,
in Thailand?
yeah.
Uh,
And not really in Thailand, I'd say more at the border, in the airport, in that bit directly when you get off the plane. Then I sort of had to wait there for a long time. Eventually got back to the UK, and everyone was saying, my friends were like, "Oh my goodness, you must be so glad to be back. You must be so happy to be here." And for me, I was really not. I was having a great time. I was really finding that in London, whilst, you know, socially it's great, there's loads of work opportunities. There's such a impression of like a herd. Uh, there's such a herd feeling where everyone is on a similar track, because of the cost of living and everything. You have to be living a certain lifestyle to be able to feed yourself there and live there. And I just was enjoying having more space, you know, and living somewhere more remote to actually reflect a little on what I wanted in life and what I enjoyed and what was important. And for me, it is a lot harder to do when you're living in a busy environment like a city.
yeah, it's interesting. Have you read René Girard's work on mimesis? I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
Oh, you should definitely go down that rabbit hole. Given your background, you'll love it. But he was basically a philosopher, I think really would be how you'd define him. But he had this theory about mimesis, that we basically are mimetic, so we copy things. And he's got a
Mm.
whole kind of theory about sacrifice, how there has to be a sacrificial person. So, oh God, I hope I'm going to explain this well. I'm probably going to absolutely butcher this, but basically where you're engaging in mimesis, you're competing with somebody else, and then at some point that competition has to be resolved. But in order to avoid bloodshed, what you do is you find a scapegoat. And so what he sort of posited was that society finds these scapegoats and they become like the sacrifice. And so one of the things that people relate that to often is like the Bible, and they say, well, you know, because Jesus became the sacrifice, that allowed society to operate peacefully. because they don't require a sacrificial lamb, like somebody else to be sacrificed, if you like a witch burnt at the stake. The village is having a dispute, they need to find a scapegoat. Oh, that person will do,
Right.
and
Yeah.
they're not necessarily the culprit. But there's a really good, the René Girard stuff is quite hard to get through, but there's a really good book written by a guy called Luke Burgess called Wanting, and he basically just puts it into layperson's terms. It's much easier to digest than René Girard's stuff directly. But the reason I say that's interesting when you talk about the herd mentality, because I was living in New York when the pandemic hit. And what I found was interesting, and I saw in myself, but also in other people, is once you're extracted from that kind of rat race, and you're not just looking at everybody else doing the same thing and you're all kind of running the same race, you suddenly start to realize that those things that you thought you valued in life, you actually don't value at all, and you don't even like them. That really struck me. Things like, for example, I used to love going out for dinner in New York. Couldn't give a shit now about going out for dinner somewhere, just like so low on my list of priorities. Stuff like that, and stuff like, going to the theatre or going to the ballet, or I don't know, like name any number of things. And now I'm kind of like, oh wow, like I spent so many years doing all of those things, and now I've just got so little interest for them. Like, in fact, not little, zero. Because I'm not surrounded by people that are doing that, and I don't feel the need to. I'm just like, it's not something that I particularly, left to my own devices, would actively go and do. So I don't know if you had a similar experience with that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's also, I mean, there's like it's part of like a phenomenon in psychology called social proof. So if you're aware of it,
I've
it's
heard of
basically,
it.
yeah, it is. It was coined in it's like in a book in the 80s. I think it was in the 80s. Maybe that's wrong. I don't know. Called Influence, and it's very interesting because you can, it's really recognizable in society, but then also in advertising as well, and it's kind of the cornerstone of a lot of how companies market their products.
Mm.
And the premise is basically, when there is uncertainty, that we don't look inside ourselves, we look to copy the people around us, and we put trust in the group. In That's the social proof. So if you, for example, there was one experiment that's in this book, where I think it was like in a restaurant in China, some scientists were setting up this experiment, and they put a little asterisk on certain things on the menu, and at the bottom it said what the asterisk said, and it said, "This is the most popular. These are the most popular items on the menu," and they found that those items were significantly more. Since that point where they put the asterisks, they were selected like 20% more or something like this. And that's really interesting. And they also found that the people who were selecting the asterisk items the most were the people who it was their first time in the restaurant, i.e., they had the most uncertainty, they don't know. So when I think that happens, in cities, and it's in a normal life, you if you're not sure what to do, you see other people doing stuff, you then therefore believe that's fun, that's the thing to do, and you absorb opinions from around you without really being able to investigate it much yourself, or understand, okay, I could do this, or I could do all these other things. Maybe what do I want to do? And I think it becomes even more apparent during the pandemic, where there isn't time or the ability to understand stuff in depth, especially, for example, during COVID, where we didn't have access to the information that said what is the real level of threat, what happens if you break this rule. And then social proof tells you, well, my friends are doing this, therefore I should do this, and I think that's true with a lot of things. We live in an age of so much information that it's impossible for us to really understand things on a deep level. Well, understand everything on a deep level, we have to be selective. And I think a lot of people understandably become just kind of give up their authority and give up their ability to investigate things deeply, and go off the belief that, well, if a lot of people are believing this, then it's probably true.
Yeah, I mean, it's very time consuming to research something yourself. And I think particularly during the pandemic, I mean, there was so much like genuine misinformation coming out from respected authorities like the government and health agencies that, if you were relying on that for your data, you were probably in a bad shape anyway. But yeah, I mean, it was very hard to kind of discern what was true and what wasn't. I mean, I was a complete mask Nazi at the start of the pandemic, like totally, and was just like, have to wear a mask everywhere and this is what, but I felt like I had done my research. Like I did listen to podcasts with doctors and read stuff, and I was like, oh, okay, well, they're saying this and this is what people who've tested have done. I mean, I'm really embarrassed to say this now, but I was one of the wipe down your Amazon boxes with wet wipes people as well. Which now I'm like, what?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's interesting. You can get swept up in believing
totally.
something because,
But they had done some studies where they were testing to see how much of like the COVID virus was on the different surfaces. And so I just went off the back of that. I was like, oh, somebody's done a test on it. Well, better not risk it. Don't want to bring it into the home. So we'll wipe down the boxes. And it just seemed to me like a sort of somewhat low effort thing to do that, might protect everybody in the household from dying. Now I'm just like, good Lord. So that actually brings me to a question, actually, which I'm curious to ask you because you've studied this, and I've thought about this very, very deeply since, because I was just like, what the heck happened to my critical thinking abilities, or did I just completely lack them, and to begin with? Given that you sort of understand that mental process, what do you do differently, or what would you recommend that people do differently when they're presented with information? Like if you had to replay the pandemic and you're me, what would you do?
that's an interesting question because obviously with hindsight, it's so much easier to say how people should be. But one thing that struck me was just how different people's opinions were between different localities. Like I was in London and then I moved to Cyprus. And I really felt how people in London had a much stronger feeling that of responsibility, personal responsibility for the life of other people. Not just like that they didn't make other people sick, but that they weren't going to kill other people. And it was really it's quite intense. I remember a close friend of mine saying, oh, I'm not really sure, but I'm going to follow it because I don't want to be, quote, on the wrong side of history. Like so that's so
Mm.
it's very intense. It suggests that he's fearful. They're fearful that um, when this all blows over, he might be personally responsible for the death of these people. And um, I don't know. For me, I had like done because I was interested in social science, and one of the career lines I was looking into was in behavioral science and behavioral economics. And the UK government, I know, have a department called the Nudge Unit, which works across the world. But they have had a particular team. I'm not sure if it was separate to the Nudge Unit or together, but I think it was called the Independent Scientific Pandemic Insights Group. And I went online and I was investigating a little, found some minutes to a meeting that they had, which was in relation to their government advisory service. And it said in black and white that to one of the problems to adherence to the COVID rules was some people not feeling that there is a certain amount, enough risk for them to stay indoors and lockdown. And this could be influenced by herd immunity or vice or whatever. And they're literally saying we need to create a scenario where people feel like a lot more fear and increase the sense of risk. It was literally like, I think I even wrote it down. Yeah, it was like, quote, using hard-hitting emotional messaging. I mean, to be effective and give people clear advice of how they can omit the risk. And for me, that just it just made me think, wow, okay, all the information we receive, it's because they want us to follow these rules, not necessarily because it is actually this level of risk. And I think it's important, as you say, how would I advise someone? I think try not to be judgmental about people's decisions, because everyone only has a limited amount of information. And when listening to other people, see it as an opportunity to sort of test your own ideas and debates, to find more, to get more knowledge yourself, and also see other people's like level of knowledge, and try and build a picture like a map, rather than hearing something and assuming that it's the extreme in this way or it's the extreme in that way. I don't know if that answers your
Yeah,
question.
I guess maybe seek out dissenting voices. I mean, to me, it just seemed so obvious at the time. I was like, well, this thing is a really serious thing, and we've seen what happened in China. Never occurred to me at the time that the Chinese were making all those videos up. It just seemed like, oh, this is what's happening. If anything, I thought they were covering them up. So I was like, oh, these videos are escaping from China and showing how serious this thing is. We really need to worry about it. But I have to
Yeah.
be honest, it's not like when it hit New York, and New York was allegedly at the epicenter at some point. It
Yeah.
had like apparently like a whole bunch of cases, and it was all, they were shipping, and they brought in this big warship that had all these ventilators to great fanfare. It came up the Hudson, everybody lined up to see this ship coming in. It was literally like, it's wartime.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because, I mean, I never saw anyone collapsing in the street in the way that they did in the videos in China. And in hindsight now, I look back and I think to myself, it's funny because I never questioned that at the time,
Yeah.
why it was that we weren't seeing that, But I guess my assumption was like, well, these people are probably in the hospitals. We're not seeing them because they're not out on the streets.
Yeah.
But my friend mentioned repeatedly, she said, oh, I saw the morgue trucks parked on the street. And I said to her recently, did you see any bodies? Because I was like, anyone can park a morgue truck on the street doesn't mean there's something in it. You know what I mean? And I was like,
Yeah. I mean, the thing was for me during COVID was we know that putting people in isolation, reducing like physical activity. Well, basically, the guidelines were we know that people who are most at risk are people who have existing health conditions, and the others are probably going to be more or less okay. You're not super at risk. So for me, the obvious answer was why this is an amazing opportunity, especially in the UK, to put a massive health campaign and get everyone exercising, get everyone outdoors. Yeah, I mean, I know people who are working in hospitals, and yeah, they were saying it was super chaotic. I'm not saying that no one died during COVID or that it didn't cause deaths. I just think that it was like it was exploited. In the UK, we had to travel back to the UK. I had to pay 150 quid for a test where I never got the results, and just to have the certificate. And it's just and then we found out that those tests were partnered with the government's friends. So it was just taking the piss, just making a mockery of people.
did
And
anything ever happen about that, by the way? Because I saw a bit of press about it, and then it just died off for all these kind of government cronies got PPE contracts and things like that, and all this money just disappeared. Was there ever any recourse?
I don't know. I don't think so in the end.
Mm,
No.
no. Incredible, isn't it? It's just like the level of corruption is insane. Can I ask you then, did that inform, like, were you a Bitcoiner before that? Did that inform your Bitcoin journey? Like, has this sort of experience and what you've witnessed, did that start you questioning the monetary system as well? Are they connected in any way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, before I was aware of Bitcoin, and I knew of it, but only really in terms of, its monetary value at that point. What was the price of Bitcoin? But at that time, really made me question the information we receive, and our ability to be critical thinkers, and how important that is to be able to think critically and have an interest in what's happening around you, have an interest in why things are the way they are, and not just turn a blind eye. And I remember being on the phone to a friend when I was in Cyprus, because I was having a conversation with her, just like having a whinge and a moan about I know, I was just really shocked how people have become super judgmental and polarized during COVID. And I thought that was a huge shame because it became really separated in our views because we were listening to one source of media or another. And our lack of ability to understand things in a more holistic way and understand nuance, and that things are not just as simple good or evil as the media likes to suggest. If you do this, then you're a good person. If you do this, then you're a bad person. And so I already had an intention to create. This was before I started filmmaking, and I already had an intention, I don't know, to create some project based around encouraging critical thinking and understanding of others in a neutral way. And I think that will increase our ability as humans to connect with each other, and also to just have a better understanding of the world and to make our own decisions as individuals rather than in this chaos and just going with whatever the status quo is. And it was a similar time where, also my partner was learning about Bitcoin at that time. And I can't remember if he pointed me in this interview or if I found it, but in some way I watched an interview from a Bitcoin conference where it was a woman from North Korea, and she was talking about her experience of her use of Bitcoin to escape North Korea, and then it helped her later in her journey because in North Korea, a lot of women that escape become trafficked in China.
In China, I heard that.
And then the children, then if they have children, she was explaining that the children are not eligible to education, for education. And so there are these.
Sorry, in China, you mean?
Yeah, in China, because they're born partly by North Korean blood, and so they there are these underground schools that exist in China for helping to educate children who have been born in this way. And for me, that was so fascinating, and I started investigating more, and I found really interesting examples. For example, I don't know if you know the story of Roya Mahmood, who's one of the first female tech CEOs from Afghanistan, and she used Bitcoin to pay her staff because she wasn't able to pay them in fiat currency because money would have been stolen from them, and they were using the Hawala system, but it wasn't very consistent, and sometimes money wouldn't get to the end person. And it was something basically summarized my sort of. It was like a concrete example of something that the media you hear is like Greenpeace advertising of how Bitcoin is just pure evil and does no good for the world. And here are these stories, like real human stories about people who had relied on Bitcoin or used Bitcoin because it was the only way to find some kind of. And that was for me something important that needed to be shared, and there was a strong story to be told there. So that's how I started investigating into what are the uses of Bitcoin, and it also as I started to investigate more and realize this story, I also saw making a documentary as a way for myself to investigate what is happening in the world around us, what is money, why do we have inflation, what is another system possible, how would that work? And that's how I got interested in Bitcoin circular communities, and looking at case studies where people are already trying this and experimenting to see how people's lives are being affected already, and what is that hope for the future, and what are the risks, what's at play. And yeah, it's been a fascinating journey so far.
So what have you explored in the documentary so far? Like, who are you filming and where do you plan to film it? Like, what's the kind of I guess storyboard for the film?
So far I started in March, and I filmed with Bitcoin Akasi in South Africa.
And can you talk about what that is for people who don't know what Bitcoin Akasi do?
Yeah. So Bitcoin and Cassie is a project to create a circular community based on Bitcoin in a township in South Africa. And the way it works is that there is an existing social empowerment project. In this case, it's a surfing school. So kids, which existed for a long time before Bitcoin and Cassie. So there's kids from township. They live super close to this beach in a town called Mossel Bay, which is on the western coast of South Africa, on the Cape, a few hours from Cape Town. And the kids some of the surf instructors are from the surf program, so they are from the township as well. So the surf instructors are paid in Bitcoin, and all the staff who are local to the area are paid in Bitcoin. And there's a project to onboard top shops from the township to accept Bitcoin as payment. So therefore there becomes like a circulation of Bitcoin as currency within the community. And the Herman Vivier, who runs the project, he was commenting how before his aim using for the Bitcoin project was one, to make a more fundamental impact in a place in an area of the world where they've suffered a lot of oppression. There's lots of inequality. There isn't a sense of like a long-term mindset, because people are not able to save money, and people don't really there's not many opportunities, and so people are just sort of spending money as they receive it. They also are not banked. Many of them are not banked. If they do have bank accounts, and they are in jobs where they get paid in bank accounts, they withdraw their money as soon as possible, so as not have the fees of the banking system, which is more than having a bank. For myself, for example, in the UK.
So they have to pay deposit fees, you mean?
Yeah, there's like a lot more fees for them to use the banking system, and so they hold cash, but that's pretty unstable to hold cash in terms of theft. It's not very secure. So you're not incentivized to save money. Therefore, you're not incentivized to try and plan for the future and change your, improve your living situation if that's what you want to do. Maybe some people don't want to save. That's a different thing. But if people want to, then they don't really have the option. And since they've implemented, they've been trying out using Bitcoin. It was really interesting to speak with the local business owners there, because they're actively really looking for something like, in a way that they could store money digitally, where it's not, they can easily transact it, they can easily they can save easily without any huge amount of fees, and it's secure. They know it's there, they know it's theirs. And that already was transforming lives. People were saving to expand their businesses, create restaurants, to buy a car, to different things. And also it changes your mentality, that you start thinking for the future. You start thinking of new possibilities that maybe you wouldn't have beforehand. So it was very eye-opening to see how it's already having impact on people. And
how did you decide on that location, and how did you end up going there? Like, what was the actual trajectory? Like, how did you just contact them and say, hey, can I come and film you? And how did you finance it? Like, how did that whole process work?
So my idea originally was to visit different communities around the world, and tell sort of a character-based story where you're really understanding how people's lives are affected, and spending time with the people there. And I was lucky that, so I was already interested in looking at different projects, and then I was on a job that started from South Africa. It was a camera operator job that was working with a project called the Maiden Factor, which is a organization that promotes girls' education around the world and women in STEM. And they had contracted me to join the project to document their story of a world tour. So I was already going to be flying out to South Africa, and then we were sailing to Brazil, doing a transatlantic crossing. So yeah,
Nice.
opportunity. Yeah, it was a pretty crazy experience, but I saw the
So did
opportunity
you
to,
did the transatlantic crossing with them?
yeah. We
Wow.
were 11 women on a boat in 17 meters of space for just short of a month, 3 weeks, crossing the ocean.
That's wild.
Yeah, it was a very memorable experience. It was very, yeah, it was a special experience. But I was lucky, I was super lucky that it was during this time, and I contacted Herman from Bitcoin Nikasi and said, I'm filmmaker, I'm making this project, I'd love to come and spend time with you guys. And he was really open and welcoming, and I was lucky that I have my own kit, and so production wise, the main cost was travel, and my travel was covered from my job. They flew me out a few weeks earlier, and then I rented a car, drove up the coast, stayed in a Airbnb which got orange built, and then yeah, that was that.
Wait, so you went there on your own and you drove up the coast on your own?
Yeah.
God, you're bonkers.
It was great. It was amazing. And it was really interesting because, this when I was there, obviously it was organizing all the shoots myself, organizing all the interviews, understanding the storyline, conducting interviews, getting to know the people. And it was pretty intense 2 weeks. But great fun and so lovely. I felt so welcomed by everyone there, and it was very inspiring to actually, to understand, what's going on. And then I drove back down the coast. Oh yeah, when I was in Mossel Bay, I bumped into Bitcoin on the Beach, who runs projects in Witstrand, which is basically halfway between Mossel Bay and Cape Town, called
Hmm.
Bitcoin Witstrand. And yeah,
Bitcoin what?
it's because it's Afrikaans, it's based on Dutch. It's called Wit sand, which means white sand. It's like
Ah,
W
okay.
sands. And it's a little like an old fishing village, which is now kind of a little hamlet, little village in the middle of nowhere, but it's so beautiful. It's huge white sand dunes, and yeah, he's just living in this village, super crazy about Bitcoin and this orange pilling his area, trying to onboard local businesses, and he's already got, I think, 25 or so businesses. We went for dinner, paid with Bitcoin, topped up my car with Bitcoin, topped up. It was really cool. Um,
Wow.
yeah, it was awesome. That was a nice little stopover, and then I went down and joined the sailing team, and it was just such a big stark transition between being on my own time, everything, managing everything, and then being part of a sailing team, which is super regimental. Obviously it's fun and you're part of a team, and that's great. But a very stark difference between doing everything in your own time, and suddenly it's at 7:30 we're meeting here. We're at the boat at this time. We're starting to film here. It was a realization like, okay, time to change mentality. Um, yeah.
Gosh, did you have to follow that schedule, or like were you having to help with the sailing, is what I mean, or were you just there to document it so you could just kind of be a
Mm.
part, be there, I guess?
Yeah, well, I was a member of the crew, so my background was from filmmaking rather than sailing. A lot of them where they were trying out for a global race, so a lot of them were had racing backgrounds. And on the boat, because obviously you're sailing 24 hours a day, the boat never stops. You work in rotations, so you have a
Uh,
watch where you're on deck. You have to be on deck, and then a time when you're off watch and you're resting. And on the boat, it was like 4 hours on, 4 hours off throughout the day and the night. And but for me, I chose my own watch. So because if I went on the same schedule, I'd only get to film the same people. So I pretty much just changed my own watch, which was really nice because it gave me a little bit more, I don't know, flexibility to manage my own time, plan things how I wanted, and I got involved with the sailing. I mean, you'd be twiddling your thumbs a long time if you didn't want to sail. And
Did you
also, it's
manage to orange peel the crew on the journey across?
um, not that many, but yeah, it's quite a different group of people, I suppose. But look, it was some interesting conversations definitely we had on the tour, and it was great because the crew, the idea was the crew was super international. There was two women, well, one woman from South Africa, one from the Caribbean, Uruguay. Later, someone from India joins UK. So it's a total mix of cultures, people, all in one space for 3 weeks, and you have to get along.
Oh, that's fascinating. So, in terms of like your Bitcoin journey, then with your film, so you've done Bitcoin Akasi. So, is the film going to be released with just focusing on Bitcoin Akasi, or are you going to carry on with your original idea of visiting different communities?
I'm going to carry on visiting with different communities, but I'm currently fundraising because it's self-funded at the moment, and yeah, it just that my limiting factor at the moment is, being able to maintain financial stability whilst making the project. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not trying to make money with it. I just want to finish it and not be in debt. So
Where else are you going to go and film then? Like what your have you sort of planned the places that you would like to go? I mean, are you going to visit El Zonte, like in El Salvador, or like what were your plans in terms of the locations you'd like to film?
So one on the top of my list is there's a human rights activist called Marin Estefanos, and she was talking at the Oslo Freedom Forum this year. We were speaking before that because she has a really interesting story. She's from Eritrea herself, but was a Swedish citizen, and she's campaigning, well, trying to basically work in anti-trafficking because and using Bitcoin to to help with the research and to find out who the traffickers were. She's been working in this for 20 years and has horrendous, unbelievable stories about, people calling her when they're in the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean, calling for help from her directly, or people whose family are literally being tortured at that moment, and they need money to, for like ransom money, again and again and again. And she's recently moved out to Uganda and is running a project basically in their capital, trying to set up a Bitcoin circular community there, working with refugees who are in need of a way to store money, are in need of money, and using Bitcoin in a similar way to Bitcoin Akasi, to help to work with refugees. And the project, I think she's been there 9 months already, and it's still being built. But I think she's just a super inspiring woman, and I would love to go and spend some time with her. And she's really keen for me to go. She's invited me out, but again, it's just getting the funding to actually to go really. And so yeah, that's my next big push, is to make effort with fundraising. But it's funny because I mean, since moving into filmmaking, I've really had to change my mentality with social media. I'm not someone who advertises themselves a lot at all. In fact, or the opposite. I'm known amongst my friends as just not really knowing where I am, what I'm doing. It was a message from my friend saying, "Where are you in the world? What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm in Japan. Oh, I'm doing this." I'm like, "Yeah, it sounds about right." And so it's quite a change for me to work
Do you mean
public.
that you have a life outside of Instagram?
I hope so, because my Instagram usually only gets updated about once a year. So yeah, I'm trying to make effort to work more publicly, and show the work I'm doing, because obviously it's important to for people to get on board and see if it's something that they want to be made or not.
And
So
typically, where would you go to raise funding? I mean, you're going to sort of individuals who can pay your travel expenses or to organizations who would want to support this stuff. Like, what's your target market for fundraising?
so far I've set up a gaze fund, and that's about it so far. But my plan is to, you know, approach. I did have one Bitcoin related company message me about purchasing some of my content, so that gave me an idea to, you know, contact maybe sponsors of the projects that I'm interested in already and see if they're interested to give it visibility. Um, yeah, work to
And
be done.
yeah, what's your timeline? Like, when do you hope to get the film finished by?
So I really want to finish it for the next Bitcoin Film Festival, which is going to be next April. So time's ticking, and that's when I want to get it done. Yeah.
Is that Pierre Corbyn's the one, the project that he's working on in Prague, that one?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So
Amazing.
I sat with them, and they said that the next one's going to be in. They were like, "When is your film going? When are you planning to finish it? Just is it going to be ready for the next film festival?" And so I think that's a really good goal. It's super important. I think, you know, when you're making any project, for me at least, in my perspective, especially within filmmaking, to have a deadline, because, you know, you can keep on working on things forever. And yeah, my goal is to film it and screen it in the next film festival, and hopefully get a good response. And I think it's going to be really interesting because, you know, and when I talk to people about the projects I'm working on, most of the people I speak to in my daily life are not Bitcoiners, and their initial reaction to hearing about Bitcoin is, okay, yeah, interesting, but, you know, this and but their main feedback or feeling about Bitcoin is, well, I'm not super interested because of its global, you know, green impact, or because of this or because of that, or it doesn't have any relation to me. And so it's going to be interesting to see how people, you know, to show it to, you know, my friends and other people like this, and see if I can change any minds.
It's
Yeah.
interesting. I mean, it's just, yeah, the amount of, like, is it misinformation, disinformation? I don't know, those terms are used so much, but the amount of like nonsense I hear about the green stuff. So my position on the climate stuff is that I'm a bit of a climate skeptic, because I never had a deep interest in all of this stuff. And then when I decided to start looking into it because I wanted to understand it better, I just realized that there were so many divergent points of view, and so much of this stuff is obfuscated or exaggerated, or they're taking measurements in weird places. All that said, um, you know, what I say to people is like, look, if you buy into the narrative that, you know, carbon emissions are warming the planet and methane is warming the planet, and then on the flip side you turn around and tell me that you're not supportive of Bitcoin mining, you either haven't understood Bitcoin properly, or you're lying about what your beliefs are in terms of the climate. Those two things can't coexist otherwise. You know, if you really think that the planet is being warmed through human activity and carbon emissions and methane emissions, then you have to be supportive of Bitcoin mining. And if you're not, then, you know, I don't believe anything else that you're saying. That's just
Yeah.
my take,
I think
really.
definitely. I mean, I feel like we, humans, do have an impact on the climate, on the global climate, and we definitely, yeah, I think we definitely have an impact on the climate in my perspective. But I think that this comes down to what I was saying earlier about social proof, is that you hear a narrative, it gets circulated, and that the ripple effect is that other people feel that they don't need to investigate that because so many people already believe this.
It's ironic that you use that word, the ripple effect, because it was Ripple that funded Greenpeace's campaign.
Yeah. It's literally the ripple effect.
I mean, do you know, I think it's actually really sad in some ways to see Greenpeace doing that, because I think as an organization, they've just lost all credibility. I mean, it's just, you know, I've always felt that their work was very important in terms of, you know, preserving the environment and, you know, biodiversity and all the rest of it. And I just feel like they've, you know, did they really have to die on that hill? and to essentially be actively preventing the proliferation of a technology, or attempting to prevent the proliferation of a technology that resolves what they say is their objective. I mean, it's really sad just to see them go that way as an organization. It really is, but it
it's
is
so
what it
sad
is.
because it just makes you lose. It's just so deflating, isn't it, to see organization that, as you say, I used to think they were respectable, that they had good interests, and then when you just see stuff like this, it's like it's just a bit of a joke, really, isn't it? And it's so obviously it's so obvious influence and corruption, or using their authority to persuade people, not
Yeah.
only on environmental reasons, but because they're being funded by Ripple. I mean, you don't
Yeah.
even have to. It's not many dots connect.
No, I
Um,
mean, this is the thing. I mean, I think, to be honest with you, at this point, they've just lost all credibility. And I imagine their days as an organization are numbered. But I will say this, though, is I mean, I've seen a lot more truthful press going out now about Bitcoin mining in recent times than I had prior. Like, particularly in organizations like Forbes, for example, has put out several pieces that, were very supportive of Bitcoin mining. And I always say, when I meet an environmentalist, I'm like, oh, you really love to hear about Bitcoin mining, because that really plays into a lot of the things that you would care about. And they often look a little bit surprised, like they look at me
yeah,
like,
of
are you
course,
sort of being, are you trying to like pull my leg
yeah.
or something?
Yeah, yeah, because it seems initially like something that would contradict, but actually can work very well
Yeah.
together.
Did you manage to connect with Alana, by the way? Did you guys ever have a chat about that? Because her whole
No,
documentary
but
is
I would,
basically about that.
yeah, I would love to speak with her. She seems like a really interesting person. I was listening to the podcast that you guys did together.
Yeah,
Uh,
she's great. I mean, she's done so much more since then, because that was back in, I think it was January. I want to say January or February. So I mean, she's literally interviewed the gamut of, I think, just about everybody in the Bitcoin mining space, be they an
wow.
environmentalist, be they a Bitcoin mining company, like politicians. She's
Mhm.
just, I don't even know how she's going to, I mean, her editing, her cutting room is going to be interesting, because I don't even know how she can fit all of those things into one film. She might have to do a part two.
Yeah, curious.
Yeah, definitely. So listen, I mean, it's been great chatting to you. Do keep in touch, because I'm really excited to hear about your project. Could you just share all of the links that people need to, support your film? So if anyone's interested in funding your project, if they would like to support you, if they'd like to follow your work, can you give like your website URL and all of your social media links?
Sure. So my website is jennareid.xyz, and I also have a Twitter which has links to my Gazer Fund. That is Jennareid_docs, like it's in for documentaries. And yeah, from there you can find links to everything, really. Or you can contact me either by my email, or there's a link from my website. But if you want to contact me by email, it's films@jennareid.xyz.
Perfect. Okay, great. Well, best of luck with your project. I think it's amazing that you're doing this, and I love this whole Bitcoin film industry, by the way, that's sprung up. There's
Yeah,
there's so many good films. It's really, really cool. And I actually would love to make it to Prague next year for the film festival. So I will. Are they still, sorry, no, they did it in Warsaw, wasn't it? Is it Warsaw or Prague
yeah,
they're doing it? Warsaw.
Warsaw.
I've never
I
been to
think,
Warsaw, so I'd love to do that. Actually, it'd be great.
yeah, I've never been either, but yeah, I really hope to. That's my goal. Finish it for next year. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Okay, well, I will keep my fingers crossed for you. We'll blast this out to as many places as we can. And I'm so pleased. I think it was actually Mick that told me about you. So Mick from Geyser. So I think that's how I found you. But yeah, it's been such a pleasure. Do keep in touch, keep me posted, and yeah, best of luck with it all.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's been great to talk with you. And let's stay in touch.
Likewise.